staying with us into the third hour of the agenda on this Sunday morning. And as you could see in our opening shot, we have a guest in the studio, Chiboni Evans, who will continue a conversation with in relation to energy. Let's start the show. Well, thanks once again for staying with us. We were talking before we chased to the top of the hour to Chiboni Evans. She's the CEO of the South African Electro Technical Export Council, about the production, provision and usage of energy. And this is a look ahead to the 2019 Energy Indaba that will be taking place in Sandton. Chiboni, thank you so much for indulging with us and agreeing to stay with us in this amazing conversation about energy and the different facets of this sector. But as we were going to break, we were also talking about the effects of population growth, on the continent, on energy provision. Talk to us about that conversation.
Okay, I think in the years to come, there are two key game changers in terms of the African energy sector. One is the growth of our population, and the second one is the industrialization that we need to undertake as a continent in order to grow economically. So with regards to the growth of the population, especially because we've got a younger population, a more technologically savvy population, a population that needs to keep in touch more, it's going to be very, very important that we do have the right levels of energy and the right access of energy to various people on the continent. So the younger people, for instance, everybody has a phone that needs to be charged, and that charging needs energy. So that's a very, very simple and basic fundamental thing that needs to happen. We need to make sure we have energy so we can keep connected to the rest of the world. Otherwise, our young people will be years behind everybody else. That's the first thing. The other reason why, and I'm very passionate about this, why I believe that we need to ensure that we very quickly get the right levels of energy generated on the continent, is that when we don't have generation of energy through either hydro, coal, which is not so common anymore, renewable sources and so on and so forth, then energy still needs to be utilized by our people, and it will be cutting down of trees, and it will be charcoal. And for me, from a personal perspective, what happens is that I feel if we don't create the energy, then there is typically a woman or a girl child out there going out and collecting that fuel to burn it, to cook, to light up the house. So we're liberating women by ensuring that we have energy on our continent. Yeah. That, for me, that's just a personal thing from my perspective. So we need to make sure we energize the continent as quickly as possible. From the industrial perspective, all industrialized economies in the world have got close to 100% access to energy. If you look at the United States, Europe, and so on and so forth, their levels of energy access are sitting at 100%. The lower your access to energy is, the more likely you are going to be less industrialized.
How does South Africa compare?
South Africa was sitting at 95% in terms of our urban population and 85% in terms of our rural population. In 1994, we started off at about 50. That sounds like
such a contradiction when you consider all the conversations we continue to have about access to and availability of energy.
And this is why I was saying, as South Africans, I think we need to be looking more, and this is why it's the Africa Energy Indaba, because it allows us as South Africans to actually understand
have a broader discussion.
What do we have. We cannot be so introspective and discussing issues which I'm not saying are not important, but it's almost like you come from a wealthy home and you're complaining about your problems when there are people out there who've got nothing. So as South Africans, we need to understand the position. I don't know.
There are real situations.
I'm not saying they're not real situations. Yeah. We have got those real situations. But we have to have an African conversation around energy.
Yeah.
We cannot just have a South African, because the South African conversation, let me put it in perspective. We need to build, according to the World Bank and African Development Bank, in terms of Africa's infrastructure build, we have a deficit of about $100 billion per annum deficit for infrastructure build on the African continent. Yeah. 70 to 80% of that is for energy. Not a lot of that is happening in South Africa. It's in the rest of the continent. And that's why, from a business perspective, what is happening on the African continent for energy is important to us.
So one of the biggest stories to come out of the continent in terms of the African Union last year was the ratification of the free trade agreement. And this speaks a lot to what you're talking about in terms of putting investment into infrastructure development. And this also this conversation rolls into the energy conversation, because a lot of financing, talking about how to finance projects for infrastructure in the energy space. How involved are African countries in terms of the conversation of how to build this infrastructure, this energy infrastructure, and bringing on board African expertise?
Now, that is where we, as the Electrotechnical Expert Council, together with the other expert councils called the Engineering and Technology Grouping of Export Councils, are pushing very, very hard with institutions such as the African Development Bank, the World Bank, the Economic Commission for Africa, to say, as we build this infrastructure on the African continent, can we please ensure that there is African participation in this build? Because Africans need to be involved in building the infrastructure and thereafter in maintaining the infrastructure. Because if we don't do that, what's going to happen is that we'll get the Europeans, the Americans, the Chinese, and everybody else building our infrastructure, and we won't build expertise on the continent. It is our continent to build, and we need to start building that capability. South Africa, therefore, has a key role to play in that, because we built our infrastructure as South Africans. If you remember, we built the energy infrastructure at the time of apartheid. So we've got a lot of knowledge in South Africa that we can share with the rest of the continent. And we need to start now partnering with the continent to build this infrastructure.
Give us a sense of the skills base, not only in South Africa, and the rest of the continent, in terms of this specialized area.
Okay, so I think the two key producers of energy on the continent are South Africa and Egypt. So there's a lot of skills that exist in those two, the north
from
and
one tip to the other.
So that's one of our starting points. So, and then we've got a lot of multinational organizations that are located in Africa that can bring their skills in and are now going to be more attracted to bring their skills and technology into Africa, because when you manufacture in Africa now, because of the Continental Free Trade Agreement you've just talked about, it means that there's a free movement of goods across the continent. So it makes more sense as an investor from overseas to locate your plant and your manufacturing facility on the African continent for supply into the African continent, because of the Continental Free Trade Agreement. So we can utilize overseas expertise, but let's utilize it on the continent. And that's what the Continental Free Trade Agreement will do for us.
Young people, as you said, are trying to be innovative about finding ways to charge their phones, and new kind of ways of accessing energy are coming up. Are you creating space for this wave of young thinking and new ways of doing things?
One of the things that happens at Energy Indaba is that there is an event that takes place where we assess certain innovation from young people, and somebody gets awarded at that event as well. So we're tapping into what young people are doing. But also I think a lot of young people and small and medium-sized enterprises can get involved in certain components of the energy value chain. Because we can't all be a large multinational organization such as Steinmuller or...
But do you give them some sort of support after they've been recognized?
Yes, we do. We do. And the Department of Trade and Industry also gives them a lot of support, and so does the Department of Energy. In fact, the Department of Energy gives a lot of support to women in energy. So part of the first day of Africa Energy Indaba is an event called Women in Energy, which is supported by the Department of Energy. So there is a lot of support mechanisms, and people are always welcome to talk to us, not just at Energy Indaba, but even outside. Look us up on the internet. If you want to get into the energy space, please talk to us, and we'll see how we can assist.
And just to end off our conversation, I love that you're talking about the value chain. Somebody joked the other day that when black people think of energy, all they think about is running fuel stations, and yet there is so much to do in this space. What are some of the things that people watching us now who are interested in being active in the energy space, what are some of the ways they can get involved?
Okay, I'll give you an example of one of our newest members actually. So it's a company called Nyamezela Metering. It's a black woman who's in the distribution space, prepaid metering, installing, advising on how to put in systems for various utilities around the continent. Mozambique, she does work in Mozambique, Zambia, and so on and so forth. So you can, you don't have to build a power station. You can go and connect people who are going to use the energy. So installation is a big space that I think people can get involved in. And we've got a lot of black businesses that are involved in the installation and engineering services that go with energy supply.
All right, there's a lot to talk about, but obviously we can't cover it all in this conversation. Chiboni Evans, thank you so much for talking to us. What are the details for the Energy Indaba this year?
It takes place from the 19th and 20th of February 2019. As the Electrotechnical Export Council, supported by the DTI, will be bringing in 20 delegates from 5 African countries as well, so we can have the African conversation. There is a Women in Energy on the Monday, and then on the, which is the 18th, and then the 20th, there's a specialized program for independent power producers and power purchasing agreements.
Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you very much.
Chiboni Evans, she's the CEO of the South African Electro Technical Export Council. In the Limpopo provincial government,